All right, today, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth travels to Guantanamo Bay, where he will visit the facilities housing migrants deported by the Trump administration. They halted efforts to build tents to house more at Guantanamo after concerns they did not meet detention standards. Let's go right to CNN's Natasha Bertrand for the latest on this. Natasha, what are you learning?
Secretary of Defense Hegseth, he is expected to land in Guantanamo Bay pretty imminently, and this is the first time, of course, that he's going to be visiting the facilities there since the Department of Defense started transporting migrants to Guantanamo several weeks ago. But at the same time, we are learning that Guantanamo Bay, they've actually stopped building tents there because of concerns that these tents don't meet ICE detention standards. Namely, they don't have air conditioning. Of course, it's very hot down there, and they don't have electricity. And in addition to this, there also is not currently a justification for building more tents because there are simply not enough migrants actually being deported to warrant setting up more housing facilities for these migrants. Currently, there are only about 17 migrants being held at the higher threat area of Guantanamo, known as the detention facility, and 177 migrants were deported back to Venezuela last week. So right now, there simply is not the need for these additional tents, and there is not the justification, of course, because they are not meeting those standards set by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Now, this is all indicative, of course, of the really harried efforts by the Department of Defense and DHS to scramble to set up additional housing facilities on the island because they were anticipating that they would need housing structures for up to 30,000 migrants that were going to be deported from the U.S. southern border. But now, of course, as I mentioned, there are currently only about 17 people being held on the island. And at the same time, only about 50 migrants are even going to be able to be held at the Migrant Operations Center, which is that transit point for migrants who are not considered high threat or violent, but that are going to be stationed there until they're deported back to their home country. So all of this together paints a picture of Guantanamo being used, of course, by the military because they wanted to send this signal that the higher threat, more violent criminals were going to be held at Guantanamo. But at the same time, there simply are not enough people being deported to the island to justify setting up additional housing structures. So it remains to be seen what Secretary Hegseth is going to be doing there today. He has said he's going to be receiving briefings about the migrant operations facility on the island. There are about 1,000 service members currently stationed at Guantanamo in preparation and dealing with this new tasking by the Department of Defense, John.
Natasha Bertrand at the Pentagon. Natasha, thank you so much for that reporting. And with us now is John Sandwyk, former acting director of ICE. Thanks so much for being with us. You know, Natasha's reporting there, not enough need to justify the expansion at Guantanamo. Guess to something bigger that's happening here, which is that right now we're hearing that Donald Trump, the president, is not satisfied with the number of migrants being deported. They can't do it fast enough or big enough for him. How surprised are you that they're not able to reach the numbers that in his head are acceptable?
Well, John, at this point, I'm not that surprised, right? This is what we've been talking about previously, which is that when you target a criminal population, that is tedious work. It is slow work, and you're not dealing with a large criminal alien population that's present inside the United States. So this idea that by just saying we're going to take the gloves off and then deploy ICE assets to go after, and they're going to encounter all these, huge numbers of criminal migrants out there, really was never based in reality to begin with. During the Biden administration, ICE routinely focused and prioritized this population, so you didn't have that many targets to begin with. And then you have to deal with the resource challenges that you face at ICE, where you only have 7,000 officers, and the number of arrests they can make is really just driven by exactly that, how many officers you can deploy. Look, I expect that the administration is going to make a shift in tactics here. I think they're going to start pulling into all these state and local officers to deploy them to focus on the immigration problems. They're going to pull these other federal agencies in, but they're also going to have to reduce their targeting and expand it to where their primary target is not anyone who has some nexus to the criminal justice system, but probably just migrants who have been in this country seeking a better life, and probably have been here a long time.
So if they want to expand the numbers, they have to change the targets?
That's right. They're running. Part of the problem they're facing is they're running out of these criminal targets. What they've been doing, John, is pulling data from the criminal justice system, looking at probation and parole records, looking at people who might have been charged with a crime, in court, but were never booked into custody. But this is a tactic that ICE has been doing for the last 20 years in a population they've been focusing on. So you're not finding that many targets out there who meet that criteria. The only way to solve this is really by two things. One is expand that target range. And I think we've already, we know that they're already grabbing collateral. So when they go out there in the streets and they target that criminal, anyone else they encounter who's undocumented, they're arresting. So a significant percentage of the arrests they've made this far are not actually criminals. But the second thing they need to do is they're going to need to expand that target base and then expand the force multiply. Get other agencies involved in the game targeting those other non-criminal populations. If they continue down the path they're on, they're not going to solve this problem that they perceive of increasing the number of arrests. The only way to do that is by expanding that target list.
John, I'm not hearing you at all. I think our audience is. So I'm going to go ahead and ask a question, but be aware of the fact that I actually can't hear what you're saying here. So I want to ask you about a Politico report that came out this morning. That's interesting and gets to what I heard you talking about right there, which is the staffing issue surrounding this effort to deport migrants. Politico is reporting that before Donald Trump was inaugurated, there was a discussion about trying to privatize some of it, bring in contractors to help with deportations. This is from Politico. A group of prominent military contractors, including former Blackwater CEO Eric Prince, has pitched the Trump White House on a proposal to carry out mass deportations through a network of processing camps on military bases, a private fleet of 100 planes, and a small army of private citizens empowered to make arrests. Now, this did not go into effect, but what does it tell you that there were these discussions and explorations to privatize some of these functions?
Yeah, I think many of the ideas outlined in that memo are crazy. The idea that we could have a private, cadre of bounty hunters going out on the streets and arresting migrants is frightening and would obviously be plainly unlawful. But I don't know that the people understand that a lot of the work that ICE does is already outsourced. More than half of ICE's detention capacity is run by private detention providers who work under a contract for ICE. ICE air transportation operations are already funded by contract. ICE does not maintain a fleet of government jets. They instead pay private contractors to do that. I anticipate that we're going to see an uptick in that work. I know the share prices of the detention providers skyrocketed when Trump was elected. And I think going back to this kind of targeting problem the administration has, I would expect that they're going to outsource even more of that work to private contractors who will do the kind of painstaking work of identifying a potential arrest target. But look, I think we're going to see more of this. A lot of money is coming ICE's way when Congress passes this budget, and I can promise you a lot of private contractors are out there looking for ways to get a piece of that money.
John Sandwyk, in a miracle of communications, I did hear that last answer, so thank you very much for being with us this morning. Thanks.